Hello, and welcome to this month's Staff Chat. For those of you who are new to the Staff Chat series, my name is Priscilla Andrews. I'm the clinical manager here at the Cancer Wellness Center. The Staff Chat series was created as a way to give our participant community an opportunity to hear conversations between professionals about topics that are of interest to people impacted by cancer. And I am very excited to have with me here today one of the center's newest additions, Serena Jain, who is our current mindfulness expert. Serena, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Priscilla. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah. Just as a little background, I always like to ask people this question, and I'm curious, since you are new to the cancer wellness community, both about kind of what drew you to mindfulness and what your background is in mindfulness.
Great. Yes, that's a wonderful question. So I started meditating, which is a practice within mindfulness, in my early 20s. And I did that as a result of a health crisis in my family, which impacted me in ways that, caused me to become stressed out and
Sure.
anxious. And I wasn't quite sure how to deal with it. And I had heard about mindfulness and meditation as a means for coping with stress. And so I ended up attending my first 10-day silent meditation retreat in my early 20s. And
I'm so impressed. Look, I can't even be silent as you're saying that. That's amazing.
exactly. So I know it's not easy, but it was immediately helpful
Yeah.
in coping with anxiety and stress of this crisis on my family and on myself. And it was so transformational for me that I found it to be life changing, really.
Wow. Wow. So that it sounds like that personal experience is now translated into what you do professionally.
Absolutely, because I found it to be so profoundly helpful and beneficial in my life, and in dealing with crisis and challenge, that I want to share this gift that
Yeah.
with everyone. And it's a skill that we can all learn, and it's a very trainable skill for everyone, accessible for everyone.
Well, and I know when I had a chance to meet you, I was impressed by the background that allows us to call you a mindfulness expert. But for our listening audience, what kind of training do you have in these practices?
Yes. So I am a qualified mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher. I went to the University of California, San Diego's Center for Mindfulness,
Mm.
where I learned to teach that program. That is an 8-week stress reduction program. And I'm an integrative health and well-being coach from Duke Integrative Health. And
Wow,
yeah,
those are
yeah.
some fancy credentials, Serena.
Thank you. Yeah. So I have combined the two to be able
Yeah,
to do this, and
that's awesome.
it's really a gift. Yeah.
Well, I'm just really excited for our conversation today, but also really glad to have you a part of our team here and being here to support our community. Because mindfulness is always, I find it's of interest to so many people. There's also been a lot of buzz around mindfulness. Um, and if I could pivot us to that subject, I think in my experience with the people I work with, I have the people that are drawn to mindfulness practices. Maybe they've taken a mindfulness class or they've had like a mindfulness app. So there's like a certain amount of, let's call it buy-in. And then I know I have, and some of my colleagues have had clients, and they come in and they're like, don't try any of that woo-woo mindfulness stuff on me. Like, I'm not going to be doing that. And I'm curious for those folks, like, how would you explain mindfulness? Like, what is mindfulness? What does mindfulness entail?
Absolutely. So mindfulness is not sitting quietly on a mat and just becoming absolutely peaceful and all that. It is not. It's actually so the definition of mindfulness is the awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose, in the present moment, without judgment. And I'll repeat that because it's very important. So it's the awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose, in the present moment, and without judgment. So when we are not mindful, we are living on autopilot. And when we are living on autopilot, we can become very reactive to any external stimuli.
Yeah.
And that's oftentimes in ways that we don't always want to be,
Yeah.
those knee-jerk reactions, those things that happen without really thinking. So mindfulness enables us to create space to be able to kind of think before we act, to be able to be aware of what's going on for us, both externally and internally. And that is what mindfulness is really about. And it's a trainable skill. And it's really accessible because not only can we do it formally, sitting, for example, on a meditation cushion or doing yoga or a body scan meditation, we can also do it informally. We can bring that level of awareness that we're cultivating through these formal practices in our informal life when we're doing things like taking out the trash, or when we're, watering our garden or making dinner. All those activities, normal activities, we all do them. But oftentimes when we do them, we're so used to doing them that we often go into thinking about the past or planning for the future, or worrying or ruminating about something, and we're not really present for what it is that we're doing. So we can learn to be present in whatever we're doing through training in mindfulness. And when we do that, we're more present. We're really in our life. And when we're not present, we're not really present for life.
Well, and I think, as you were talking, it was funny because I was like noticing, like, okay, Priscilla, am I paying attention to her? Am I thinking about what I'm going to say next? Right. I'm aware that that's going on. That I think the thing that really resonated for me as you're talking is, when I'm working with people, I talk a lot about our nervous system and that kind of part of our brain that has a faster reaction time than our conscious brain. And people have to cultivate awareness about what is happening for them and those responses that are happening that could be physiological in nature, because what happens is people aren't aware, they don't notice those shifts in themselves, and then by the time they notice something's going on, the train is barreling down the tracks at 100 miles per hour, and that's a lot harder to slow down. So there being that aspect of that awareness, then allowing you to be aware, maybe not always to be in a zenned out state, but to be aware of those shifts that are occurring, to give some, I don't want to use the word control, but empowerment of like, okay, some choice of what I'm going to happen next, alongside of, I think, this other piece that you're bringing up of like being mindful as a way, can I be present so that when I am in a moment of joy, and I am in a moment of calm, or in a situation where I could really be savoring the experience, that mindfulness piece really allowing me to be present with that, versus I'm here with my daughter, but what I'm thinking about is I need to do the laundry, when I'm missing out on that experience that's right in front of me.
Right. Absolutely. 100%. You nailed it. And we can, when we go off into fight, flight, or freeze, when we go offline, and when we go into those knee-jerk reactions, what mindfulness does is it enables us to build space and awareness to be able to catch ourselves before we go into those. And also gives us the agency of choice. So instead of being reactive, we can then become responsive to stress. We can choose how we respond versus just reacting.
Yeah. Well, I'm so, I think this piece of it to me is so important, because I do have that experience multiple times where people will say, I tried meditating, and this actually just happened. Somebody said, like, I tried meditating and I couldn't focus, I couldn't clear my mind, and I just was like, well, that's it. I can't do this. I'm failing. And what this person said was, it was only years later that I finally learned that that wasn't the point, right? Like, I think there is this confusion,
There's a
right?
major misconception. And I tell a lot of my beginner students, all of them, that the mind was made to wander. That's the big secret, right? You're not trying to stop your mind from wandering, right? You can't,
Yeah.
it's actually not possible because our minds wander. They wander all the time, and they're doing that for good reason. It's actually an evolutionary tool if you think about it. They're
Yeah.
scanning the environment for threats. Our ancestors were constantly scanning their environments for the threat of a saber-toothed tiger attacking them. So they were constantly scanning so they could actually live and survive.
Yeah.
So our mind's wandering is an evolutionary tool. What we're doing in mindfulness is we're just training the mind to refocus, this repeated refocus, deliberate refocus on the object of attention. So whether that's doing the dishes, whether that's noticing your breath, whether that's building body awareness, whatever it is, it's building the mindfulness muscle. So we're not trying to stop the mind from wandering. That's the big secret. And that's something that people find very difficult to understand at first, because that's not the goal of mindfulness, because it's actually not possible to stop your mind from wandering.
Yeah. And that notion of that, I hear you bringing up, that there is the practice of mindfulness that is taking a mindfulness class. And we're going to be in this situation. I mean, I guess I'm saying it as a statement, but it's more of a question, right? There's the experience of, you could take a class and we're going to talk about mindfulness and we're going to practice it here together. And we're going to talk about what it was like to practice it. And now go out in the world, and when you can, at these moments, whatever the directive might be, or the invitation might be, bring that same awareness, do that same thing when you're doing the dishes or driving your car or playing with your grandkid or whatever, because you're just always just training that awareness muscle.
Absolutely. And mindfulness, I like to say, it's dose dependent. So the more we do it, the more benefits we notice. So I can read about mindfulness, we can talk about it, I can even learn about it, but it's really the act of practicing it that will build that awareness over time.
Yeah.
So I can't do it for Priscilla, you can't do it for me. I can only do it for myself. And I can't do it by reading about it. I have to actually practice it.
Yeah.
And then when I practice formally, those formal practices like a sitting meditation or a body scan, or a purposeful mindful movement, a yoga type of practice, mindful walking, I'm more able to translate that formal awareness into my informal life. Right.
It's a bridge. I mean,
right.
It's well, and I find that is one of the things that people struggle with, and I don't say even me, I don't want to separate myself out like I'm on some sort of cloud or something, but like that I think is so hard is, especially working with people who are dealing with cancer, really craving immediate results and wanting something that like that is going to make things better. And there is a piece of mindfulness, right? We call it a practice because it does take, I don't know if I want to use the word dedication, but it does take an investment in practicing it in order to get better at it, in order for it to maximize its usefulness, let's say. I hope this is making sense, because I'm curious, like when you encounter people, I have to imagine you have, that are wanting to use mindfulness, but maybe are like struggling with the fact that like, well, I took that one class and it's not helping me. I'm curious, like what guidance you provide, or kind of what your thoughts are when somebody is finding that impatience is coming up for them as they're trying to learn.
Absolutely. So that mindfulness, you can think about it like cultivating a garden, like tending to a garden. So when you're tending to a garden needs sun, it needs soil, it needs, food, it needs love and attention, it needs water. So there's many ways that we cultivate mindfulness. And one of the ways is there's two ways. There's those formal practices, the
Mhm.
informal practices, and then there's also our attitude, right? There's many different attitudes we talk about, attitudinal foundations of mindfulness, and patience is actually one of them. so
Funny, I
so
should bring that up
yeah,
then.
it's funny you should bring that up. There's 9 of them, and we can go over them. But things like beginner's mind, trust, patience, non-striving, um, uh, generosity, gratitude, acceptance. So over time, we're also cultivating these attitudes in our lives and with ourselves to be able to know that yes, we are cultivating mindfulness and it will take time. And I'm going to bring this attitude of patience to my practice, this attitude of trust that things will unfold in their time, right?
Yeah.
Their way. Now, one thing I will say about immediate impact, right? So if you think about there's different levels of practices, there's different types of practices, there's many different types of meditations that we can do for different benefits. One thing that really truly does bring immediate relief is something called belly breathing. So that's deep diaphragmatic belly breathing,
Yeah.
which is shown to, immediately calm the central nervous system, to lower anxiety
Yeah.
when you breathe in that way. And so what I like to do with my students is to begin with practices that are very tangible, that you can feel kind of
Yeah.
immediate results, but in the sense, those results are not going to be forever. They're not going to be like, once I do it once and then I'm mindful for no, right. This is a long-term path, and it is
Yeah.
it's very worth it because it's been shown to be tremendously helpful. Scientifically through research has been shown to be tremendously helpful in many ways, physically and mentally in our lives. But again, there's a sequence of practices that are best to go through. So for example, when you go to the gym, we don't begin by lifting 100 pounds. We're
No?
gonna start by lifting maybe 2 or 5
Yeah,
or maybe
right.
10, right? So we're not gonna become an Olympic athlete right away. We're gonna
Yeah.
train slowly over time. So yeah,
Yeah.
if that
Well,
makes sense.
no, that totally makes sense. And I'm so glad that you brought up the belly breathing, because I think it touches upon, and I wonder if there's more you could say about the fact that there is, mindfulness being this practice that has physiological, I don't know, impact. I can't figure out exactly how to phrase it, but right, it's tied to our physiology, right? Doing the deep breathing is about shifting your nervous system state and moving out of the automated response that your body has went into because it is in a state of fight or flight, bringing awareness that you're in the state of fight or flight if you're not practicing it, but you're utilizing it, and then bringing the awareness of like intentionally breathing in a certain way that then sends that signal up to your brain that says, oh, wait, like I'm not being chased by a bear right now. Like I could probably, my nervous system doesn't need to be on fire.
Right.
And I think it speaks, so to circle back, I think it speaks to the fact that like these practices, while there is a mental component to it, they have a physiological reality to what it triggers in our body. And I'm curious if you could speak to like what research says about the benefits of mindfulness practices and cultivating that awareness.
Absolutely, Priscilla. So when we're in the fight, flight, or freeze response, we truly experience physiological changes in our body. Our heart rate, it becomes rapid. Our respiratory rate increases. We can start to ruminate. Thoughts can start to ruminate, and we can kind of spiral right out of control, physiologically, internally, and mentally. And when we bring mindfulness into that, it gives us the ability, the agency to pause and to realize that this is happening for us before we then go into our autopilot reaction towards that. And so in modern day life, our stressors are very different than they were in our ancestral times, right? They were experiencing perhaps the stress of a saber-toothed tiger. They may see the saber-toothed tiger, they may run to safety, and then when they get to safety, they realize, okay, I'm in a safe space, and I can calm down again. Like my body will calm down again immediately because I'm no longer experiencing the threat of being attacked. Today, in modern day life, there's ongoing stressors, right? Sometimes the stress is, for example, in ancestral times, there was a beginning, a middle, and an end. Today, there's not necessarily a middle or even an end. Stress is happening all the time, right?
Yeah.
There's, work-life balance, there's home stress, relationship stress, financial, so just a lot of different things that can cause us stress. And so we have to, with mindfulness, we have to be able to work with that, right? We know that that's a very different case. Evolutionarily, we have a stress response for a reason.
We would be here without it.
Right. Now the stress, we're no longer faced with that same stress. Our stressors have changed, but the way we react to stress has not.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
and I always point that out to people as well. Like, the part of your body that may be responding to, waiting for the test results to post, right, is the same part of your nervous system that would have responded if there was a saber-toothed tiger that was about to bite your head off.
Absolutely.
Right. So even if you're not in a situation where the threat is so imminent that you are actually like in a life or death situation in that moment, that is how your body is interpreting that situation, and it's reacting in kind, right? It's an adaptive response. It's just not serving us in a situation where, you're not going to click the button and something's going to come through the computer and bite your head off. It may feel that way. Like, I don't want to minimize what it feels like, but,
No.
I think, and, I think the thing that, just to go back to the whole, like, woo woo, don't try that mindfulness stuff on me thing. I feel like that, I feel like this piece of mindfulness in some ways has gotten diluted in the way that mindfulness gets talked about in like pop culture, or it gets missed, especially because in some ways it's great. It's become a lot more accessible and people know about it, right? But there's like apps, and like, I think there's even like a video, like there's a like choose your own adventure video on Netflix by Headspace. That is right. So like, if people are like trying to wade through that, like what do you recommend?
So
yeah.
I understand. Absolutely. It's very mainstream. It's become very mainstream. I don't know if you've heard the term Mick mindfulness, so it's become very mainstream. It's hard to know, right? There's so many apps, there's so many TV shows, it's a buzzword. How do we know what to do, right?
Yeah.
I highly recommend, and I always will, that we take, anyone who's interested in mindfulness, take a class with a trained mindfulness teacher. To be able to learn the initial foundational skills of mindfulness.
Yeah.
And then you can go on, because it's like anything else, right? If I want to, learn some pedagogy or some sort of discipline, I need to learn it from someone who's trained to do it. And, we can absolutely use apps to meditate or practice mindfulness. But I really think it's important to learn those foundational skills with a trained mindfulness teacher. Someone who has trained in the art and science of mindfulness, because it is one. It takes us years and years to be able to become teachers and to teach this, because there are so many levels, and there's so much to unpack and understand and learn, both about the physiology of the body and what the mind can do and how they're related and how mindfulness plays a part of that. And you did mention something about, and I want to touch on that real quick, is the body. So the body absolutely is evolutionarily reacting to stress, right? In the same way that it did ancestrally. However, the stresses are different. The interesting thing about mindfulness is that we're building body awareness as well. So, and the body is always present. So the body is not traveling backwards or forwards or in a constant state of worry. The mind and the body, that connection of the mind and the body, can create that for us. However, with mindfulness, we're understanding and building our awareness of our body to know, oh, my heart is racing right now,
Mhm.
or, oh, I'm perspiring, or, oh, I'm getting really tight, or whatever's going on, to be able to
Yeah.
say, okay, I need to pause before I
Yeah.
go into my automatic pilot knee-jerk reaction and go into doing something that I'm going to regret,
Well, and something that you just said just made me think, I think that awareness and being able to catch it, what I often find is that people are not noticing what is going on in their physiology. They know they don't feel good,
Mhm.
right? But they almost like it's so uncomfortable almost that they like in some way dissociate from it, right? And then what happens is that response gets even more inflamed. So then by the time they do notice it, it's intolerable and it does take more to adjust and come back to a baseline
Absolutely.
versus when you're more aware of those shifts. I think people worry that if I am aware of those shifts, I'm not going to know what to do and I'm not going to have time to do anything about it. So I just need to stay doing the thing that I'm doing because
Mm.
I can't slow down because, I can't go get a massage for an hour and I can't go take a bubble bath. And that recognition of when you catch it sooner, what you need to do to adjust for that, what you need to do to send that in polyvagal language, which is the language I use, send that cue of safety may be quite subtle and only take a few moments or a few minutes versus, the train going at 100 miles an hour can cover a lot more distance than if you stop the train when it's going 10 miles an hour.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And there's two things I want to say. These are very good points, Priscilla. Um, there was a study done on meditators.
Mhm.
And in the study, there were two groups. There was the group of meditators and the group of non-meditators. And both were introduced to a stressor, which was a loud noise. So if you look at this is the axis, right? The time
Yeah.
axis. I don't have like a fancy graph or anything to show you. But so when the stress, the stressor of this loud noise came, these two groups are traveling along. Immediately, the group that meditated went straight up. Their stress response went straight up, really high. And then over time, their stress response came down, and it came down pretty quickly, back to
Yeah.
baseline. The group of non-meditators, their stress response went high as well, but they stayed in their stress response a lot longer, right? So it's not that we're not going to feel the stress.
Yes.
We are going to feel it. We're able to come back to baseline with awareness, at a healthier rate than someone who may not be.
You
So
don't get trapped up there.
right. So the other piece of this is we're building awareness. So just because we're aware of something doesn't mean we like it or we're going to forgive
No.
it or, we're happy about it. What we are doing is learning to accept it.
Yeah.
So I'm becoming aware, and I'm also becoming more accepting, both of the external experience and the internal experience. And then when I can accept it, I can adjust and choose the appropriate response for myself, skillful
Yeah.
response, if that makes sense.
It totally does. Well, and I think that term acceptance and the fine tuning of acceptance is not the same thing as satisfaction. Acceptance is not the same thing as being happy or approval, right? Or like wanting it, right? Like acceptance is just this, in some ways saying like, okay, this is what is going on in this moment. And I may have my own reaction to it because I bring that up because I feel like acceptance, I think, is something that comes up a lot with people when they're dealing with a cancer diagnosis. And I think sometimes people can confuse acceptance with the notion of I'm making meaning out of it and I've accepted it. So now it's the gifts of cancer. And And certainly I think that can sometimes be what's the word I would say, a consequence of acceptance can lead to that, but that is not, there's still space for your emotional experience, even if you're accepting what is going on, and in mindfulness being a pathway towards accepting this is what's happening in this moment.
Right. It's very important. So this is what's happening in this moment, and this is how I feel about what's happening in this moment, and I'm accepting how I feel about what's happening. I think that part is even more crucial,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
We're accepting the experience of whatever the external,
Yeah,
and it's really, really even more crucial for us to accept our internal experience.
yeah.
Because if we're not accepting, we're not, we're not really living in reality, right? Like we're not,
Yeah.
and we're spending most of our energy pushing things away or clinging or grasping to things that are not, that are not actually real, or wishing things that were a different way. And so when we're doing that, then we're not living in a real situation. We're not accepting our own experience of how I feel. If I tell you, hey, I'm angry and I don't want to be angry, I'm not accepting that I'm angry, I'm going to be more angry.
Yeah.
Right. It's going to make it harder for me.
Well, and I think I'll say too, you've gotten me like all on a topic I love talking about. I think the reality from the frame I come from, emotions are labels we've given to physiological responses. They are there whether or not we want them to be there or not, right? I may not choose to be angry. I may not choose to be sad. I can choose what happens next.
Right.
But I think that the tension that gets created, when people say I'm fine, right? Which, I mean, the people that have worked with me for a while in therapy, they know as soon as they say fine, they're like, okay, let me define that for you. What does that really mean? Right? Because
absolutely.
because you're going to have a response to the world around you.
Absolutely.
And the more you act as if you're not, or you try to push away the response you're having, then you're going to be less empowered to make choice about how you want to respond, what you need to do to take care of yourself, how long do you want to spend up here versus coming back down here. Because if we're just saying I'm fine, then we can't address the fact that well, actually, I've just had this response and I'm up here when what I want to do is get back there.
Absolutely. So true. And it's this mindfulness enables us to pause and then actually name our emotions or whatever it is that's happening for us, and then say yes to it.
Yeah.
So I'm able to pause and understand what's going on for me because I've created that space through mindfulness, that cultivation and that awareness. And then I can name it. I'm angry, or I'm sad, or I'm nervous, or whatever. I'm anxious. I'm happy.
Yeah.
And then I can, I can then move on and say, yes, I am those things. And then I can move on and make a skillful choice in how I'm going to move forward.
Yeah. So here's a question, because I looked at the time and I have a question I want to just pivot us just a little bit.
Of course.
Because I'm curious, we're talking about mindfulness, but unless you've taken a mindfulness class, could be a little bit of a black box, if you will. What's going to happen when I get in there? What could somebody expect if they're going to be taking a mindfulness class? Obviously, you can't speak to how everybody leads mindfulness classes, but within the framework of MBSR, what happens? What in that framework, when you're in the program, what gets talked about, what gets practiced, what could somebody anticipate?
Yes, that's a great question. So in my mindfulness classes, both MBSR and beginners courses, advanced courses that I teach, I first and foremost create a very safe space. That is the most important, I think, part of this experience. There's a safe space for us to come and to be together and share in community and practice together, and then share about our experiences with mindfulness and, of course, with life, because as we're practicing, we're going out into the world from moment to moment, class to class. So we're creating that shared, safe space. We're creating a sense of community with all the other folks in the class. We're sharing our experiences. So there's discussion. And so there's this common humanity piece that, oh, this person is experiencing this with this practice, or they experience this with their life this week, trying to do this practice. And when we name and share that, we often realize we're not alone in our struggles, which is a huge part of these mindfulness courses, a huge part of us being able to kind of unfold organically in mindfulness and within each, these courses together, is understanding that we're not alone in our struggles. There's this common humanity piece. We're all human, and we all are suffering in some way or another. And it's a part of the human experience. So there's that. And then there's there's this whole idea of, again, there is teaching going on. So there is a bit of a didactic teaching portion to these classes, but most of the class is experiential. We learn practices, we share practices together, and we discuss our immediate experience of the shared practice. So I'm not going to talk to you about a practice I had a week ago, or a practice I might do tomorrow. I'm going to talk to you about what's happening right now.
Yeah.
Because that's really what mindfulness is all about.
Yeah. It's very Gestalt. I don't know if Gestalt was a theory in for those of you who don't know, in therapy, that was very much about like present process, what is going on right now in the room. And it sounds like there really is that emphasis both. You're like practicing within the practice. Like, like it's very meta.
It's
right?
very meta. It's metacognition. You're aware that you're aware.
Yeah.
And that's what you're doing. You're building the awareness to be aware.
And you're not taking the abstract of, well, let me tell you about, maybe there might be part of that in the sharing, but we're not going to talk in the abstract about, well, this is what happened a week ago.
Right.
You may share that out and talk about how that might relate to mindfulness, and did you use mindfulness and like process it that way. But then there could also be the piece of like, even now as you're talking about it, are you aware of what's going on for you in this moment as you're talking about what happened last week?
Absolutely. There's body awareness, mental awareness, mental cognition that's going on. So much is going on. So us being aware. And when you were just talking, was I just thinking about me formulating my response, or was I actually listening? So mindful listening, mindful talking, mindful communications, mindful eating. There's so much that we do in these classes.
It really it just is infused, right? In some ways it becomes a way of being. I find that one of the interesting aspects of mindfulness, like when I did a training years ago in mindfulness, and there being like, mindfulness within the lens of therapy was like, it's a practice, it's a theoretical orientation, it is a philosophy, it is an approach to life, like that there's a lot of different facets through which you can think about and apply mindfulness in your life.
Absolutely. It's a way of living if you'd like to, go that far in, right? Absolutely.
Yeah. You've talked a little bit about research, right? You brought up the study about meditators, non-meditators, loud noise. I'm curious if there is like information coming out of research or studies that like really have struck you as far as, really it kind of quantifying the impact that these practices can have. That's like beyond just like, it worked for me. Not that you're saying that, but like, I'm just curious, like what stands out to you that research, that there is this evidence that says like, this really has a meaningful impact for people?
Absolutely. So I'll talk about mindfulness-based stress reduction.
Yeah, please.
So in the world of mindfulness, John Kabat-Zinn, who is one of the one of the most renowned teachers of mindfulness in the world. He went to the Eastern countries. He learned mindfulness and brought it back to the West and taught secular mindfulness. And he began this at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center in the 1970s. And what he did was he went over to the medical center and he said to the doctors, send me any patients to my stress reduction clinic that you haven't been able to cure. And so the doctors ended up sending over patients who were dealing with chronic pain. And John Kabat-Zinn put them through this 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course. And at the end of the course, those patients dealing with chronic pain were found to be able to cope with the pain better. They were able to then cope and live with their pain. The pain didn't go away. It wasn't magically, poof, be gone.
Yeah.
But it was a tremendous feat for those patients who were dealing with this, this debilitating type of chronic pain, that they could then cope with it, having gone through that mindfulness training. And that's something I really enjoy sharing, because this was done, medically at a stress reduction clinic. These were patients from a hospital. There's hard and fast data here that this 8-week program was shown to be able to help these patients alleviate their pain through being able to cope with it, both mentally and physically, right? Yeah.
I always make the distinction, or I like to make the distinction that, and maybe this is a fine tuning of the language that works for me, is pain may be a reality. The suffering associated with that pain is something that we can affect change on, right? Like, these people were still having something physiologically going on, but how much suffering they were experiencing associated to that physiological response, that doesn't have to be accepted as static.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's so many levels. There's the actual physical pain, which was found to be you can, that kind of actual physical pain that you can learn to cope with through breath practices, it's not that the pain is going to go away, but also the suffering related to the pain, the stress related to the pain. So that was also really, really tremendously impacted. And then when you think about cancer, it's been found to help with cancer-related pain, cancer-related fatigue, cancer-related stress.
That's awesome. Well, and that's why we have you here.
Right. And I'm so happy to be here and just so thankful, because for me, this is just a gift, as I said.
Oh, well, I want to just thank you so much for being here today. I always am like, how is 45 minutes so short?
It is short,
right?
You could go on for hours, and I love that you're so interested in this topic.
Yeah.
I could go on for hours.
I feel you. So here's a question: if people want to find you again through the center, where could they find you if they were interested in hearing more from you?
Well, I believe the center's website may have like a events classes schedule.
Yep, it does.
That's where my classes are. I think they're posted there. Yeah.
And which classes, just for the listening audience, which classes do you teach here at the center?
Currently, I'm doing an advanced mindfulness group. There's a advanced mindfulness class, and then there's an introduction to mindfulness class. So currently I'm doing 2. I believe in the future there will be more offerings, such as some mindful eating, food related classes, and then just mindfulness and health and well-being.
Awesome. And I know from talking to our program director that we'll be starting another introduction to mindfulness this fall, because I think you're right in the middle of the one that you're doing right now.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
If people wanted to find out more about you, they could do that at a website.
Yes, absolutely. So I have my own personal website. It's just my name. It's serenajain.com.
Oh, and I see Savina posted it in there. So thanks so much for that.
That's absolutely my personal website.
Serena, such a pleasure to talk with you. I love, it's wonderful being with mindfulness people, because they're always so present during the conversation.
Yes, absolutely. It's been so wonderful to talve with you. I'm thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for reaching out and for the opportunity to do this.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to those of you who joined us on Zoom, who are watching on Facebook, or maybe watching this on YouTube. I will be back again next month on August 9th, talking about cancer and career. So if that's a topic of interest to you, I welcome you to join me. So take care, everybody, and take care, Serena.
Thank you, Priscilla. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.